Morning. Thanks. It's good to be back here at NSMA. I have, it's, I think, been quite a while, and it's always nice to have live people to speak to instead of just staring at a screen. So anyway, as I think everybody's aware, the Commission, we've been awfully busy over the last year or so. Lots and lots of stuff happening. So let me try to give you a bit of an update on some of what's going on, and then I think we'll probably have time for some questions and see where we are. So if we can jump to the next slide, please. So, the big focus over the last year certainly has been Midband Spectrum. I think there's been no mystery on that. The chairwoman has really been emphasizing the ability to get more spectrum out there, and continue a lot of the efforts that have already begun. So, I think everybody's real familiar. Through the 3 gigahertz band, all the efforts that are currently going on. We're working on getting the Cband Spectrum up at 3.7, fully licensed and operational. CBRS is just going like gangbusters. The 3450 band is moving ahead. We're looking at free and spectrum up at 3.1. And on the unlicensed side, we got 6 gigahertz. So a lot going on through that spectrum. In addition to that, looking ahead towards 6G and some of the other things going on or what we're seeing in the future or coming, I think the chairwoman has said she wants to examine the 7 to 16 gigahertz band and keep looking for more opportunities for spectrum. And there's a whole host of things going on. We got the commission meeting later this week. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on a bunch of this stuff. So next slide, please. So C-band, 3.7 to 4.2. So I think everybody's aware we've repurposed that spectrum, for 280 megahertz for terrestrial mobile broadband, and the upper 200 left for satellite to provide their downlink services. So where are we? We are careening towards phase 2. So we've got phase 1, we've got the lower 100 megahertz in 46 markets. Operational, I know some of the licensees, well, there's 2 licensees in the lower 100, AT&T and Verizon. There's been some expansion beyond those 46 markets where satellites have gotten filters and we're able to certify that they have transitioned. I think the big news here also is, again, my understanding is we are well on track for phase 2 come the end of the year. And there was a public notice released yesterday by the Commission putting forward procedures for certification of the accelerated transition and reimbursement plans. So I think that's all good news for seeing the spectrum come into play. It'll be really interesting as we move forward into phase 2, and there's a bit of a reorganization of the band going on. As I noted, we have 2 licensees in the lower 100. But at phase 2, one of the licensees is going to move out of that spectrum to their final spectrum where they have licenses above 3.8 gigahertz, leaving the one licensee in the lower 100. So a lot of moving parts here. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is the altimeter issue. That everybody's been seeing that in the news. It has, I think, died down a little bit, but obviously there's certainly a lot of importance here. So, where are we with that? So the good news is the carriers have been working closely with the FAA on being able to clear their network deployments. And just, about a month ago, a new voluntary agreement between the FAA and several of the licensees was filed with the Commission, putting forward a way forward for deployments come July, where the existing agreements run out. Those agreements are much more flexible for the carriers in order to provide full power in many more places while still at 188 priority airports, provide protection around some runway safety zones that the FAA has defined. So that's really good news, and this is able to be done in conjunction with a very aggressive program the FAA put in place to retrofit aircraft with filters on the altimeters and/or replace the altimeters. At the same time, there's a lot of efforts going in the international standards bodies for new standards for the altimeters to make them more resilient to out-of-band emissions and such. So this is moving along, I think, just fine, and I think we're going to see a lot more deployment come the summer, and certainly into the when we hit the phase 2 transition date, which is scheduled for it's around beginning mid-December or sooner if we can certify that all the Earth stations have been converted. So there's a lot of good news there. Next slide, please. So moving slightly down in the spectrum, CBRS. I think everybody's well aware. This has been around for a couple of years now, and I think this has been a tremendous success story. NTIA just put a report out not too long ago looking at the growth in CBRS, and you can see the numbers up here. I mean, just tremendous growth. 12%, I think, on quarterly basis on the PALs, and so on and so forth. I don't need to repeat those numbers. Most of the deployments, no surprise, are GAA, the General Authorized Access, as opposed to the auction folks, the PALs, with the protected licenses. And I think, again, the way that the commission set this up, I think, basically, you could have predicted this. A lot of areas, we set this up for small area licensing. Folks could target areas they needed. And in a lot of places where there's no need or there's not a huge demand in general, but certainly need for spectrum, folks didn't necessarily need to go to auction and get a PAL. They can operate just fine GAA because there's not a lot of contention for the spectrum. So this seems to be kind of the best of both worlds. Protect the incumbents, the DoD radars on the ships, and some of the Earth stations that were already there, and provide a lot of flexibility for licensees to deploy in a way that works for them and they see fit. So we'll see. This has been a really good model. I know there's always talk of, can we expand this to other bands? A lot of our comments coming in various proceedings, a lot of comments always say, hey, this is something to think about and look at, or at least maybe some variation. So this is, again, I think something we're going to have to keep an eye on and see how it keeps working and how that works and whether that can be used in other bands. And as we'll come up to in a little bit, we've certainly have proposed similar type systems, database-based systems in other bands. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Jumping forward a little bit to the, I think the 3450 band, 3450, 3550. Again, we auctioned 100 megahertz here, very successful, sold a lot of licenses, and used a slightly different sharing regime here than we've kind of done in the past. We worked very hard with DoD in the AMBIT program in order to define their needs, and DoD was also very accommodating here in adjusting their operations to accommodate commercial broadband usage. And as you can see with the areas, we developed the CUAs, and the PUAs, the coordinated use areas and the periodic use areas in order to provide almost full nationwide mobile broadband use without any issues, except in those areas which are on the table for commercial systems to use on a coordinated basis. And just recently, we had a search committee for a transition coordinator here, and that, although we haven't officially named it, the filings at the commission have named, I think, Summit Ridge as the choice from the search committee. So we'll see. Hopefully that gets through pretty soon. But what this means, and the good news here, is it provides a way for all that coordination in those areas to start happening and allow our carriers to deploy and provide more mobile broadband 5G service in more of the country on more of the spectrum. So this, again, a slightly different model that we used here. And again, one of the things I think is important is, at least at the commission, we are always kind of thinking and looking at how can we enable more spectrum to be used on a wider basis under ways that are going to work. And there are different ways to do that in different bands based on the unique parameters. So we're always open to new ideas. If there's a better idea, let us know. We can think about it, look at it, examine it, and if it makes sense, we can propose that for various bands. But so far, this seems to be working pretty well. So next slide. So completing our walk through 3 gigahertz and moving further down. So currently we are working closely with DoD, NTIA, a lot of industry folks on the lower part of the 3 gigahertz band, 3.1 to 3.45, and seeing what we can do to enable spectrum there. So there was some legislation that provided that a study needs to be done examining the band to see what spectrum, how much could be made available without impacting DoD operations. So we currently, through the National Spectrum Consortium, have a program called PATHS, which I can never remember what the acronym is, but it's we've got this collaborative program ongoing. Where a lot of technical work has been ongoing, doing a lot of modeling of 5G systems, a lot of modeling of DoD systems. There's about, I think it's like 80 some odd different radar systems that operate throughout this band. And we are looking at how to enable coexistence between 5G systems and the DoD radars under a whole host of different mitigation type strategies. So that is ongoing. Report is being worked on, which I think is slated for completion sometime later this summer, because I think the legislation says the report has to be done, I think in the fall, like September or so. So a lot of folks involved in that. As I said, the nice thing here is we are getting out ahead with all the industry involvement at the outset, rather than coming through, thinking about it, putting out a notice proposed rulemaking, and then getting all the comments. So this hopefully will be able to smooth the way, should we be able to find a way to enable spectrum. It should smooth the way for a much quicker, easier proceeding from the commission standpoint. But at least that's the hope. So we'll see how that works. But so far it's been good, very collaborative process among all parties involved. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to jump up a little bit in the spectrum for some other things that are happening. So I will note we have a commission agenda meeting, open meeting on Thursday. So we are in the sunshine period for the items that are on there, which includes this item 12.2 to 12.7, as well as what I'll hit next, the 12.7 to 13.25 band. I will touch on what is in the pre-decisional public release items, although folks, as you know, have lobbied us in the during the in the last couple weeks since we released the drafts for some changes. But basically, what we're looking at here, what was in the pre-decisional documents, the commission, tentatively until it votes, has declines to enable mobile two-way broadband in that 12.2 to 12.7 band, and instead is putting forward some proposals and asking questions on how to enable more one-way, point-to-point, point-to-multipoint type usage in that band, and asking questions about two-way. So we are looking at how to make more and better use of that band, but the conclusion based on the studies, at least to this point, until the commission votes, and what's in that pre-decisional draft, basically says that we don't think that mobile broadband will work and still be able to protect the incumbent services, which is the mostly the DBS, the broadcast service, as well as we got some NGSOs operating in there. If we can jump to the next slide. And just moving up, this was a separate proceeding. The commission has combined these two for the open meeting. And again, here, based on an NOI that we had put out 6 months ago or so, we are looking at some proposals here to enable mobile broadband in this band, this 550 megahertz. There's some satellite usage, and there's some point-to-point microwave usage, and there's some broadcast auxiliary usage. I think the comments that came in on the NOI, I think the broadcasters said they think they can condense their usage of the spectrum to a smaller portion of the band, so that's encouraging. And based on that, the commission, again, until it votes, but the public release draft, says, we're going to look to enable as much spectrum available as we can for mobile broadband. I'm expecting the broadcasters will probably embark on a study to see, what is in the art of the possible for how much spectrum they need to conduct their activities. And then we'll move on from there based on comments we get and see what we can do. But again, as I said, the chairwoman has been pretty clear and consistent, I think, when she's spoken, that we are looking to enable and open up as much spectrum as we can, for given where everything is going and just the way data rates and the demand for data is just skyrocketing. So that's coming on Thursday. We should see a vote, and then let the games begin and the fun happen as we get the comments and get to start working on that. If we can jump to the next slide. So, not everything isn't just about licensed. We are always looking to balance between licensed use, unlicensed use, and I'll even call, licensed light or licensed by rule as different mechanisms and what makes most sense. So we've done quite a bit on the unlicensed side also in the relative recent past. So if we can jump to the next slide. Obviously 6 gigahertz has been a huge focus, especially in our office in OET. We've got many things happening here. So we did enable low power indoor unlicensed use, and that's been going on for quite a while. There's a lot of devices out there. Folks are using it. The reviews seem to be really good. Folks are getting great data rates and having a really good experience with the additional spectrum available for unlicensed and Wi-Fi 6E. We did think ahead when we did this to try to future-proof a little bit. In order to enable Wi-Fi 7 that's predicated on even wider channels, 320 megahertz channels down the road, so we won't have to embark on more rulemaking to enable that. So I know the big thing everybody's wondering about and keeps asking, well, what about standard power? What about the outdoor devices? So we are working on it. There's a lot of activity happening in the Wi-Fi Alliance and Wind Forum to develop the test vectors for laboratory testing of those devices. The discussions I've been having with those groups, I think they've been us getting them at the commission has been delayed a little bit, but my understanding is they are coming very soon, and I think the good news in turning that into a bit of a good news story is all the work that's gone into it, involving both incumbent as well as Wi-Fi advocates, should help, I think, smooth and pave the way to an easier testing process, and hopefully the testing can go a lot faster than it may otherwise have done. So I think that's good there. We are also working on, we put out a draft KDB in our knowledge database on equipment approval procedures for standard power. We are working on resolving some of the comments we got in on that, and that should be out relatively soon. We've also developed for the AFCs an API in order to query our equipment authorization database as required. The work on that is largely done, and that should be released relatively soon. And then the other big thing that's been a big focus is the very low power devices. We had proposed to allow very low power devices, asked a lot of questions. There's a lot of interest in the industry in trying to enable that. We have been looking at it closely. There's been a lot of technical studies coming into our record, a lot of modeling efforts, a lot of simulations, and we are still going through that. The key here is making sure we fully understand how these could work or under what parameters in order to ensure that we are protecting the incumbent users. And what's interesting here is other parts of the world where they've enabled the lower part of the band for low power indoor and for VLP. We have not done that here. I think that the biggest difference in the U.S., if I had to guess, we probably have as many microwave links in the U.S. as the rest of the world combined. Every time I talk to other regulators, I'm hearing, it's not a very dense deployment in most countries. So we've been very careful in evaluating this to understand what is in the art of the possible in order to look at enabling that type of operations and making sure that all those microwave links, all those incumbent users, are indeed protected under the allocation. Whoops, sorry about that. Whoops, sorry about that. Meant to. If we can, I think that's. And I should mention the other thing there. That we were looking at was the potential of doing a mobile AFC. Folks had asked for that. We put that in our NPRM, in order to allow, mobile standard power. So that's something that's pending. We also had a public notice asking about client-to-client communications. That was never a formal proposal, so that's something else that might be on the table in the future. But I think the big effort right now is continuing to work on getting standard power out there and looking at what we can do to enable VLP in order to see this keep moving forward. If we can, next slide, please. Also on the unlicensed side, we expanded the ability for unlicensed in the 5.9 gigahertz band. We had repurposed a bunch of that spectrum that had been available for intelligent transportation services, 75 megahertz, and we reduced that to 30 for the transportation, moved them off of DSRC to CV to X, and provided for 45 more megahertz for unlicensed, right above the existing Uni 3 band. Uni 3 band. So that's been real helpful. Currently, it's available for indoor use only. We had a further notice of proposed rulemaking. The issue there is ensuring protection of a bunch of DoD radars that operate in that band and how to make sure those are protected. And then we also had proposed rules, technical rules for the CV to X. So that is still pending. We're looking at that. But in the interim, we did grant just, I think about a week and a half ago or so, the first waiver for early CV to X operations. That waiver went to a whole host of parties that included both equipment manufacturers, the users, some state DOTs, as well as some of the automakers. I think there's another 19 or 20 or so waivers pending that have come in that essentially were very similar, or although not identical, to what was asked in that original waiver. And we are looking at those, and the hope is we can get those granted relatively soon now that we were able to grant this. So I know the car companies are pretty excited to get moving on developing and getting CV to X out there. So that should be hopefully coming to a car near you sometime soon. So we're moving forward there too. And if we can jump to the next slide. So jumping up in the spectrum, 60 gigahertz. So we issued a whole bunch of waivers back maybe, a year or so ago to allow some safety services that folks had asked for, especially for in-car detection of people in order to not leave like babies behind in hot cars in the summer, to alert folks. So very important safety services here. We'd also done a waiver even before that for the Google solely on the watch, on the phone with very short-range radar to use hand gestures. So for folks with limited mobility who couldn't manipulate a smartphone, they can operate it through gestures. So again, really trying to enable new applications, new services, and accessibility here, as well as a lot of these safety services. So the big issue here for folks following it is we already had a lot of communications devices in that band, a lot of WiGig-based systems, and the controversy was if you had radar, especially pulsed radar, the potential for interference. We had worked hard with all of the parties involved. We had asked them to see if they can get together and come up with a solution. It took a lot of work and a long time, but the industry did reach an agreement, which they filed with us, which the draft report and order is largely based upon. As I said, this is also up for a vote at Thursday's commission meeting. So, I think folks are real excited to see what happens here, because I think this could unleash a whole host of interesting applications and services in that the draft, if anybody's looked at it, does not limit the use of the radars to just in-cabin vehicle uses. There'd be uses outside of the vehicle. There'd be uses even potentially in other places on UAS, unmanned aerial systems. So this is going to be really interesting to see what develops here. But I think folks are really excited about just the breadth of applications that folks are going to be able to develop and move forward. So again, that's up for vote Thursday, and hopefully we can get the draft out pretty soon after that, get the rules effective, and see what happens. If we can go to the next slide. So jumping slightly different, also on the spectrum side, the commission has been very, very active on the space side and space services. So obviously the emphasis on space and space operations has been growing. The commission reorganized not too long ago. We created a space bureau and an Office of International Affairs. Again, this really emphasizes the chairwoman's, her emphasis on those space operations, satellite uses, and so on and so forth. So, over the last year or so, we've had a whole host of proceedings looking at how to look at the NGSO licensing rules and trying to make those a little simpler, a little bit easier to navigate, and a little bit fairer in the way they do licensing and processing rounds. Some orbital debris issues, looked at adjusting some of the spectrum at 17 gigahertz for some of the links there, and doing some rule streamlining. So that's been ongoing. And then sticking with space, if we can go to the next slide, please. We have our NPRM on supplemental coverage from space. Actually, the comments, I think, just came in on this yesterday, day before. So again, this is interesting. Again, looking at how do we make more spectrum accessible, more expansive, provide more opportunities for usage. So this would be looking at enabling satellites to share spectrum with terrestrial licensees on the terrestrial licensees spectrum, and essentially provide very, very high cell towers to serve rural, underserved areas, hard to reach areas, and any place that needs additional coverage, where you could do it on a wide area basis. So the commission had proposed, basically right off the bat, what I think of as the low-hanging fruit. We called these geographically independent areas, where folks had a single, a licensee had all the licenses in that area. So things like all of CONUS, Hawaii, Florida, and so forth, where you didn't really have to worry about adjacent channel, adjacent band type interference issues, other than the borders, and we do have to work out the border issues. But this way, it was kind of seemed fairly simple. There's been a lot of news lately, a lot of, as I have on the slide, A lot of interest. There's been agreements signed, I think AT&T and AST, and SpaceX and T-Mobile, and I think Verizon and Kuiper. Yeah, so there's a lot of interest. I'm sorry, Link, right? No, I got it right. And I know Link has been doing a lot of testing, and so on and so forth. So we'll see how this develops. The quick summary of the comments looks like people are all over the place. Because our take was that we would need to adjust the allocations to provide satellite allocation in the terrestrial band, terrestrial allocation in satellite bands, potentially for Earth station license, blanket licensing, and so forth, as well as looking at the technical rules, and asked a lot of questions on outside of those geographic independent areas. How do you enable this when you have a lot of licensees and different satellite operators all operating in adjacent or the same geographic area? And then the interference issues become a little bit more complex. I think a lot of the comments came back saying, maybe we should sit back a little bit, do things by waiver instead of by rule. Maybe we don't need to change the allocation table, do a secondary allocation. Again, what you typically expect in any of our proceedings. We get a lot of varied comments, but the staff is going to have to start going through those, see where industry is, kind of give it a good deep thought and analysis, and get an idea of what's going to make sense. But I do know that there is interest from other countries, talk to other regulators, and people really want to know what's happening here, what we're thinking of, because a lot of folks are talking to other regulators too around the world. So like a lot of other stuff, we seem to be out in front and leading the way on this, which is I think a good place to be. It's good for our companies, our licensees, and the public to provide many, many more opportunities for usage. If we can, next slide, please. So the other area in the sky, not quite as high as satellites, but UAS, unmanned aerial systems. We have an NPRM out there for use of the 5030 to 5091 for UAS. Kind of coming back to the database concept, the Commission proposed a dynamic mobile DSMS. Anyway, a database, to manage the use of UAS or drones across the U.S. airspace here, because again, looking at how do you enable both line of sight and non-line of sight, what we call networked type UAS activities. And that all needs to be managed both in spectrum and, I know the FAA has a lot of concerns, I'm sure, on how you manage the airspace. So, so we are trying to get the spectrum side of the house in order and looking at this spectrum based on some proposals that have been made over time. The Commission had an NOI here way back. There was a proposal from AIA. And so some of the debates here are what would be permitted. So the initial proposal was to allow CNPC control and non-payload communications. I know some folks have asked whether you can do payload. The comments, again, I think mostly lean towards the control. But again, we'll see as we keep going through this and looking at it and thinking about how it pans out. There were a lot of other questions and things explored. How would this database work? What kind of band plan makes most sense in order to segregate potentially the line of sight versus beyond line of sight type operations and make sure that gets managed in a safe way, whether guard bands are needed, and so on and so forth. So that's ongoing. But we also asked here about use of commercial spectrum. I know a lot of the carriers have been interested in potentially using their facilities to control UAS. So we will see where that comes out. And then we also proposed use of some VHF spectrum for usage here too. So that's being evaluated. How am I doing on time? Okay. So if we can jump to the next slide, please. So spectrum related, not a particular band. I think this is really important. The Commission, not too long ago, we put out a policy statement. And this policy statement kind of comes on the heels of a lot of work our TAC did and a lot of work the Commission has done in the past on how we are going to look at receivers and how receivers fit into the spectrum management process. We've always been focused on transmitters, and folks who follow the industry know we've had a lot of big issues over the last number of years that have all hinged on the quality of the receivers. So in looking at this, the chairwoman was really interested in trying to move forward here and come up with a way forward. And so the commission put out nine core principles that really boil down to receivers are important, that are as important, if not more important than transmitters for mitigating interference. And folks need to be on notice that you are not guaranteed 100% interference-free environment. That's impossible to guarantee. And you need to plan for that and start putting in as good a receiver as you can. And keep evaluating. Be forward-looking. Try to understand or get a sense of where you think things might be going, what the spectral environment is, how it's evolving, and keep reviewing this and keep planning. And to the extent possible, upgrade when needed. And the commission also, as part of this, will be looking, I think, on a case-by-case basis in various rulemaking proceedings for what can we implement, things such as harm claim thresholds that our TAC had put forward a number of years ago. I think there's a lot of interest in potentially looking at putting in some sort of a some sort of a metric or level that says if your receiver doesn't operate, at least to mitigate signals of this level, then there's not a lot we can do to help you. We've done that. In fact, we have precedent for that. There's some rules in the 800 megahertz band for that, and in a sense, we've kind of did that in C-band too, with the filter designs that were mandated, or the minimum filter designs for the satellites and what we expect them to be able to filter out, and we developed our in-band and out-of-band PFD levels based on that. So, in a sense, if folks can't mitigate at least those levels, I don't know how much the commission is going to do on the enforcement side, given that this is well known in advance and folks are on notice that these are the levels. Moving forward to other services, obviously that'll have to be done on a, through rulemaking, case-by-case basis, on an evaluation, because, again, the other is one size doesn't fit all. We're well aware of that. We're not looking to impose uniform rules across the board. We still are looking, hopefully, for industry to adopt voluntary standards and to implement those. Hopefully there's some teeth there, and create a much better spectral environment, because as everybody's aware, it's just getting more and more crowded, every day, new users coming in. If we can jump to the next slide. Also not quite spectrum related, but certainly as important, because the equipment side, we did take steps to shore up the security of the networks across the U.S., based on our covered list, which is comes out of a number of agencies, security-based safety agencies like DHS, who've determined that there's some equipment out there that we don't want in our networks for various reasons. So the commission moved on we adopted rules that will no longer allow Huawei and ZTE communications and video surveillance equipment to be certified moving forward. And then Dahua, Hikvision, and what's the third one? And Hytera, video surveillance equipment used in essentially public safety systems, government-type systems, to no longer allow those to go forward and be certified for use for those purposes. So, so this is an ongoing, continuing process. We did ask about whether we, in a further notice, whether we should rescind grants. The comments have been in on that, and I think there was a resounding no. So the commission, again, we will be evaluating those comments, and we will be coming out with a second report and order at some point in the future to, based on the proposals that were there. But the other thing here, that covered list, again, it's not a commission list. We don't have authority to add to that list. Other agencies do. But that list could grow, it could change. Other companies could be added based on evaluation from our national safety type agencies. So as that happens, we will need to update our rules, our procedures, depending on how that evolves. And then next slide, please. And then one more thing I do want to note on the RF safety, RF exposure side is we adopted new rules in 2019 that simplified the process for exemptions from evaluation. We had a whole host of complicated service-specific formulas in order to determine whether you were exempt or not. Instead, we replaced that with fairly simple formulas just based on power, frequency, and distance. Those rules, after we got them effective through the OMB clearance process, became effective in 2021. We had put forward a 2-year transition period that just ended May 3rd. So as of May 3rd, that was supposed to be the date by which folks took a look at their systems, made sure that they still complied for an exemption, and if not, went ahead and did the necessary evaluations, and if mitigation was needed, make sure those were in place. So that should be hopefully fully implemented at this point. Hopefully folks have done that and gone through that effort. We did not expect that there would be very many, if any at all, systems that would need to make any changes based on this, but it's possible there were some. There was no reporting requirements back to the commission, but licensees do need to be in compliance with the rules. So that I did want to mention that since that transition period just ended, not quite 2 weeks ago. So with that, that's the end of my slides. I guess we have some time left. I'm happy to take some questions.
All right, thank you. As always, first and foremost, Ira's been a holding, steady OET translator for the rest of us, especially us Spectrum nerds. We love what you do, so thank you for being here. But high level, I do want to see if we can take some questions, as long as you're able, till our term's over.
Ira, yesterday we had quite a discussion about the 6 gigahertz band. And one of the unresolved issues that kept coming up was how we're going to deal with incumbent interference issues. There was discussion about, hey, the FCC is really not set up to get their enforcement bureau flooded with these things, and their groups are still working on it. What are your thoughts on what the solution is?
Well, so first, I personally happen to think we got the rules right, that it should not be many, if any, interference issues, but I realize people have a difference of opinion. So I do think there are several things that can be done or can be put in place, or methods or ways of dealing with things that might pop up. So, I mean, first, for one, we do have an enforcement bureau that is tasked with resolving interference. And recognizing, as you note, they're somewhat limited in scope or staffing, but that certainly is one way we can do things. I think that there's also, you almost need to maybe think differently about maybe enterprise systems versus in-home systems. I think the enterprise systems, might have more dense type deployments potentially. But on the other hand, we know who own those, and those network operators know where their equipment is. So if there were an issue, we may be able to go to the network operators to say, hey, there's been an issue. Can you take a look at your equipment? Maybe go out and do something. I mean, I think those are options. I also think there might be other ways to enable some information sharing through the web, through various means, in order to enable folks to be aware if issues pop up. And then I think things like we did in the upper 5 gigahertz band, where we had some issues, especially I think around some launch facilities down in Florida, In those instances, I think we did have our Enforcement Bureau go out and make some adjustments to Wi-Fi to shut certain channels off. So, with LPI, there's a lot of spectrum. So, if adjustments need to be made on a case-by-case, area-by-area basis, again, I don't know how feasible that is, but these are just kind of off the top of my head things that are kind of buzzing around of ways we can do things. So, I do think there are certainly ways that things can be enforced and ensure that we don't have interference.
We have one other question while I'm bringing it over to Dr. Willis. One question is, we did have some discussion yesterday from the House of Representatives, their Chief Policy Counsel, and Michael Taggart, and he said that they're open to the concept of deploying federal test beds. So prior to bands being rolled out or new technologies in existing bands, the ability to have federal test beds test on a neutral basis, third-party basis, and any deployment that would fit under rules that are existing or proposed could be tested. Prior to the allegations going back between Party A and Party B that this will be the end of the world, and Party B is like, no, this will be the beginning of the world, and everything in between. Is there any stance that you're aware of, or any thoughts you have in response to that, if those were funded and we had these robust test beds?
Well, I think part of that is you hit it, is the funding. Again, if there's neutral testing, I don't think people would ever be opposed to testing. Certainly, I think, again, devil's in the details. How do you enable it? Where does it get done? Who does it? Under what parameters? How's the test set up? Do people agree? Do people think it's biased? So just saying we're going to set up a test bed doesn't necessarily completely solve the problem either. So there's a lot of things you need to think through when doing it. And in fact, through the National Spectrum Consortium, there's sort of already a process or a way set up that you could do some of this. So it's not necessarily a new idea, and we certainly have, I think, processes in place. There's also, and I probably skipped it or glossed over it, National Science Foundation is doing quite a bit of work too, and I meant to mention the the Spectrum Innovation Initiative that we've been working with NSF and NTIA on through a memorandum of agreement we have. And this is also trying to bring the research community closer to the regulatory community, because there's always been a disconnect, different time frames. Researchers don't always see the issues we're working on and understand what we need. They don't know, so there's a lot of effort right now to try to, kind of connect the communities. We had a Spectrum Week, NSF hosted 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was. We had some folks there. I spoke at that event, and I think there's some excitement there, and in order to try to bridge some of those gaps. On top of that, there's some other initiatives that are happening. One of which, John Chapin, again, I love the acronym for a bunch of engineers, nerds, National Radio Dynamic Zone. But again, looking at enabling some test beds. There it's more on the dynamic sharing side of things, but that could be helpful. And then I'll put in a pitch on our experimental licensing. We have a lot of ways for folks to go in and do testing, well in advance of putting proposals forward. And we've tried to make that more liberal over the years in where it makes sense in developing the program licenses. And then we've got these innovation zones. We've got one in Manhattan, one in Salt Lake. There's one for UAS down in North Carolina, and one up at Northeastern University that makes use of the Coliseum network emulator that DARPA developed. So there's a lot of opportunities out there for folks to do testing and simulation on a pretty wide-scale basis, and bring that data to us to look at.
My question is, again, on the 6 gigahertz AFC system, and I'm really confident that very soon you will get the expected responses to all these test cases that have been worked on between the Wind Forum and the Wi-Fi Alliance. My question for you is, when you get those, do you guys at the OET intend to also do your own independent calculations to see if you're comfortable with those answers, or are you going to more or less take them on face value, assuming that, you know, these things have been sort of mashed out a lot between the WinForm and the Wi-Fi Alliance?
I am pretty confident that they are going to be pretty good to go, but I've also learned, you know, over the years, never take everything at face value. So I don't know if we will go through them with a fine-tooth comb, but I think we'll certainly, at a minimum, do some spot checking to make sure we're comfortable, you know, with what we're seeing, and then enable, you know, and once we get there, and hopefully we can do that quickly, enable the lab testing. The way I always look at it, or the way I'm looking at it, there's a backstop here because we have the public testing that will follow the lab testing, which will allow, you know, any interested party to go in and exercise the AFC to make sure that they're comfortable with it. So, which is why I'm not sure you know, how much of a fine-tooth comb we need to go through all the data, all the test vectors that come in, but at least, like I said, at a minimum, do some spot checking, make sure we're comfortable, and then the backstop is, you know, all the interested parties I expect will come in and, you know, put their data in and make sure what's coming out of the AFCs they're comfortable with, that it's going to provide the protection needed. And then once we get through that, I think there should be a very high level of confidence that the AFCs operate the way they are intended to.